Hi guys, in this tutorial I'm gonna show you how to sew this cute dress called Bernd. The dress has two main options, A and B. A is a round neck and B is wrap neck with a tie. The sleeves are in a batwing design and they come in three different lengths, short, midi and long with elastic. And the skirt piece is a half circle skirt with three length options too, mini, knee length and midi. And it's gathered to your waist measurement with elastic. The final garment measurements can be found in the written instructions. I made all my samples with the mini length because it's my favorite. I'm sewing this dress using my normal sewing machine as well as my overlocker to finish the raw edges, but you can also use just your regular sewing machine and finish the raw edges and seams with a big zigzag stitch. There are probably easier sewing projects than this dress, but I think even as a beginner you can make it using this tutorial because it shows every step in detail, and generally speaking the version B is a little bit more difficult than version A because it has a lot of more steps. But as I said before, it's totally doable even as a beginner. All seam allowances are already included, so you can cut straight away. If you're sewing version B, the wrap neck, it's important to cut all the front pieces and all the facings with the right fabric side facing up to make sure that the pattern pieces will match up later. To make this dress you will need of course fabric. I'd recommend lightweight woven fabrics with a nice drape like viscose, satin, tencel, but also double gauze or linen. Also you will need some lightweight interfacing like H180, and you will also need elastic which is 0.5 to 1 centimeter wide. The detailed material list can be found in the written instructions. The tutorial starts with version A, round neck, but you can jump to chapter B to start with the wrap neck, and here is an overview of all the pattern pieces that you will need. Due to the batwing sleeve style and a half circle skirt, the back piece, the front piece and the skirt piece won't fit on your fabric fold in many sizes and fabric width. For your back piece, that means that you would have to cut two pieces mirrored instead of one on the fold, and at the red marked line you would have to add 1 centimeter of seam allowance. Same procedure for the skirt piece. If you can't cut it on the fold, then just cut the skirt piece twice, mirrored, and add 1 centimeter seam allowance at the red marked line. In case your front piece won't fit onto your fabric on the fold, there are some separating lines at the pattern piece, and you can just cut the pattern along these, and then you can cut the center front piece on the fold and the outer piece, which are basically the sleeves, mirrored, and in that case add 1 centimeter seam allowance to all the lines that are here marked in red. There are detailed lay plans and explanations in the written instructions in case you need some further support. As always, I'm marking the center of each piece that has been cut on the fold. In that case, these are both of my facing pieces, the skirt piece and my center front piece. Next, I'm going to fuse interfacing to both of my facing pieces, and I will place them on my interfacing and cut them out roughly. Interfacing is being pressed to the wrong fabric side of the facing pieces. I will add parchment paper to my ironing board to protect it, and another layer of parchment paper on top. Then I will fuse it with a lot of heat, and then I can cut them out neatly. Now I'm going to take both facing pieces and place them with right sides together, and I will pin them together along the shoulders. Next I'm going to stitch with a straight regular stitch and 1 centimeter seam allowance. Then I'm going to finish the seams with my serger, but you can also use a big zigzag stitch, and then I will press the seam allowance to the back, and the last step is to finish the raw edge all the way around. I'm going to show you how to complete the front piece. In case you cut yours on the fold, you can simply ditch this step and I will pin the outer front pieces right sides together to the center front piece.
And when stars are in light, though we burn, we would know. Jump into hole at the fire's old. And when stars are in light, though we burn, we would know.
Now I'm going to stitch with 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch, and after that I will finish the raw edges of these seams with my overlocker, but you can also use a big zigzag stitch as always.
As a sliver of your mind, in the end the call, in the end.
This is what it will look like now, and I'm going to press the seams flat by pressing the seam allowances outward. Next I'm going to show you how to complete the back piece in case you weren't able to cut it on the fold. Therefore just place both pieces with right sides together and pin along the straight edge, and then stitch with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch and finish the seam. This is the back piece now, and now I'm gonna press the seam flat by pressing the seam allowance to your direction of choice. Now I'm gonna sew the shoulder and side seams, and therefore I will just place front and back piece right sides together and pin along the shoulders and the sides. It should now look something like this, and now I'm gonna stitch with 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch, and I'm gonna stitch across the shoulders, down to the sleeve hem and at the side seams. And now I'm going to finish all of the 4 seams with my overlocker, but you can also use a big zigzag stitch as always. Now the top should look like this, and next I'm going to attach the facing, and therefore I will just pin the facing to the neck all the way around, match up the shoulder seams and the center front and back markings. If you haven't cut your back piece on the fold, the center back marking of your facing will match up with the dividing back seam. Next I'm going to stitch with 1 centimeter seam allowance the facing to the neck all the way around, and in this case I won't finish the seam afterwards because I'm going to clip into the seam allowances first. Next I'm going to clip into the seam allowances all the way around at the neck, and I will stop 2 millimeters before the seam. Now I'm gonna finish the seam. Now I'm gonna understitch the seam, and that means that the seam allowance is being stitched to the facing very close to the seam, and this way the neck will lay nicer and flat. This is what it will look like now, and now I'm going to press the neck, which is really important to make sure that it lays nice and flat. Now I'm going to secure the facing, and first I'm going to make sure that it lays nice and flush in the neck, and then I'm going to pin it to the shoulder, and then I will stitch right in the ditch. That means I'm going to stitch right on the shoulder seam to secure the facing. I'm sewing with a straight stitch and it won't be visible from the out or inside. I'm going to continue with view B now, and you can jump into chapter skirt. Here is an overview of all the pieces that you will need, and it's really important that you cut both front pieces and all the facing pieces with the right fabric side facing up to make sure that the pieces will match up later. And also a little mnemonic: the left front piece looks like a reversed L, L for left. So in case you get confused with both front pieces. Due to the batwing sleeve style, the back piece might not fit onto your fabric fold, and in that case you can just cut it twice, cut it mirrored, and add a 1 centimeter seam allowance to the red marked line. Same thing for the skirt. In case you cannot fit it onto your fabric on the fold, just cut the skirt piece twice, mirrored, and add 1 centimeter seam allowance to the red marked line. But you can also find detailed lay plans in the written instructions. Transfer all the markings to the fabric with a little notch or with tailor's chalk, and also mark the center of each piece that has been cut on the fold. Next, I'm going to press interfacing to both front facing pieces, to the tie facing, which is also front facing, and to the back facing piece. I will place it on my interfacing and cut it out roughly. Interfacing is being pressed to the wrong fabric side. That means that the wrong fabric side and the sticky side of the interfacing are together. I'm gonna add some parchment paper to my ironing board to protect it, and then I will add another layer of parchment paper on top. Next, I'm going to fuse it with a lot of heat, and then you can cut it out neatly. These are the final facing pieces, and now I'm gonna grab my left front piece, the tie facing, and my left facing piece. This is the shorter one, and I will finish all the edges as shown with my red seam. And in case you wonder what is that little part at the left front piece, there are 2 markings and you have to finish right in between. I'm gonna use my serger. In case you don't have a serger, you can just use a big zigzag stitch. Now take the left front facing and the tie facing and place them right sides together. There is a marking which will match up, and so with 1 centimeter seam allowance. This is what it should look like. And now unfold it and add the right front facing and the back facing, and pin everything together with right sides along the shoulders. Here you can see how the pieces come together. Next, stitch across the shoulders with 1 centimeter seam allowance and finish the seam. Now this is what it will look like now, and now finish all the way around, starting here, going until there with your overlocker or a big zigzag stitch. Your facing should now look like this, and next I'm gonna press the seam allowances between the left front facing and the tie facing open, and I will press the seam allowance to the tie facing 1 centimeter, and also I will press the seam allowances to the back. Now stitch the seam allowance of the tie facing to the tie facing piece with a presser foot distance to the seam, and now your facing piece is done. Next, I'm going to show you how to complete the back piece in case you weren't able to cut it on the fold. Therefore, just place both pieces with right sides together and pin along the straight edge. Now stitch with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch and finish the seam. And the last step is to press the seam flat by pressing the seam allowance to your direction of choice. Next, I'm going to sew the shoulder seams, and first I'm going to place my back piece with the right fabric side facing up in front of me, and then I will place my right front piece with right sides together on top of it and pin across the shoulders. Then I'm going to repeat this step with my left front piece. I will place it with right sides together on top of my back piece and pin across the shoulders too. Now I'm going to sew the shoulder seams with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, a regular straight stitch, and once this is done I'm going to finish my seams with my overlocker or a big zigzag stitch, and the last step is to press the seam allowance to the back. And now we're going to attach the facing, and therefore open your top flat and place it with right fabric side facing up in front of you. Now you can pin the facing with right sides together to the top, and you will see that it matches up perfectly. Now I'm going to stitch the facing to the top with 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch. Once you reach the tie, you can just leave the needle in the fabric, lift your presser foot, rotate your fabric and continue sewing. This way you will get nice corners. Now I'm going to clip into the seam allowances all the way around at all parts that are curved, so basically everywhere, and I will stop 2 millimeters before the seam. And at the tip of the tie I'm going to trim off the corners as shown, and here also I will just trim and stop 2 millimeters before the seam. And now I'm going to finish the raw seam all the way around. Now I'm gonna understitch the neck seam allowance. That means that the seam allowance is being stitched to the facing very close to the seam. Start at the end of the right front piece and stitch as far as you can. You will notice that as closer as you get to the tie, it will get harder, so just stitch as far as you can and then stop. This is what it will look like now, and this is until I was able to understitch my seam allowance. And now I'm gonna turn the tie right side out because we're going to top stitch the tie now. So turn it right side out, and then I will pin all the way around the tie, and I will start approximately at the position where my understitching ends. And I used to roll the fabric between my fingers to make sure the seam comes up, and then I will just pin all the way around the tie. And in this step we're gonna pin the little gap at this left front piece that we finished earlier 1 centimeter to the inside and pin in place too. This is the inside view, and now I'm gonna top stitch with a little distance to the seam, like a presser foot or less, and I'm gonna start at the bottom of my top, and I'm gonna stop at the position where my understitching ends. This is what it will look like now from the out and inside. And now most importantly, we are gonna press all the way around the neck, which is really important to make sure the neck lays nice and flat. You should never underestimate the power of a good press. Now we're gonna secure the facing at the shoulder seam. Just pin the facing to the shoulder seam when it lays nice and flush in the neck. I'm gonna secure it with a few pins. And next I'm gonna stitch right in the ditch, that means right on the seam, to secure it with a regular straight stitch, which won't be visible from the in or outside. Now we're gonna sew the tie, therefore grab both pieces and place them with right sides together, and then just pin all the way around, leaving the short end open. Next I'm gonna sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch, leaving the short end open. Here are corners again, so that means leaving the needle in the fabric, lifting your presser foot, rotating your fabric, and continue sewing to get nice corners. Now I'm gonna trim off the tip and the corners and clip into the seam allowance, and I will stop 2 millimeters before the seam as always. Then I will turn the tie right side out and pin all the way around. Here as well I'm gonna roll the fabric between my fingers to make sure the seam comes up, and here as well I'm gonna leave the short ends open. This is what it will look like now, and now we're gonna top stitch again with a little distance to the edge, like a presser foot or even less, whatever you like. And I'm gonna leave the short ends open, and the last step is to press it. Now we're gonna close the side seams and therefore place the top with the right fabric side facing up. The tie will be pinned to your right front piece, which is laying on the left side. The tie will match up with the marking, and there will be a 1 centimeter distance to the bottom edge. At the opposite side, the right front piece along with its facing will be pinned to the side seam of the left front piece. The left front piece is on top of the right front piece. Don't get confused with right and left, because the left front piece is now laying on the right side, so don't get confused here. And this is what it looks from the inside. There is no distance from the right front piece to the bottom edge, and it lays flush with the side seam. Now, once this is done, just fold your back piece down and pin along the sides with right sides facing. At the right side, you are pinning 4 layers, the back, the left front, and the right front with its facing. And at the opposite side, you are basically sandwiching the tie between the front and the back piece. Here are some closer views of what it should look like, and once everything is pinned in place, you can just sew with this straight regular stitch into 1 centimeter seam allowance and then finish the seams. This is what it will look like now. This is the final result right side out, and now the hardest part is done. Now I'm gonna sew the skirt. From here on, the sewing steps are identical for both versions, and I'm folding my skirt with right sides together, and I will pin along the side. I was able to cut my skirt on the fold. If you weren't able to cut it on the fold, you will have 2 pieces that will be pinned together here as well. Now sew 1 or 2 side seams with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch and finish the seam. This is the skirt now, and now I'm gonna divide the waistline into quarters and mark them by either aligning both side seams or by aligning the side seam with the center marking and then clipping some little notches into the quarters. Now we're gonna attach the skirt, and a little side note to view B. Here the left and right front pieces will be pinned together starting from the side seam until the start of the tie or the center. There is also a marking, and those 2 layers will be from now on treated like 1 layer. Now the skirt is laying with wrong fabric side out and the top is laying with right fabric side out, and now I'm putting the top into the skirt, and I will pin those 2 pieces together all the way around. Pin the front and back center markings together first and then distribute the fabric in between, because the front piece is a little bit curved, so the front top the front is a little bit longer than the back, and for that reason the side seams won't match up perfectly. This is what it will look like no matter which version you're going to sew. The only difference is that in this area here there are 3 layers for view B and only 2 layers for view A. And now I'm going to stitch with 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular straight stitch, and after that I'm going to finish the raw edges of the seam. This is the final seam, and here I made version B, and here you can see that the left front is only stitched to the skirt until the beginning of the tie, so both ties are free to be tied. Now you need a piece of elastic, so first wrap it around your body to figure out the perfect length. It should be tight without cutting into your body, and then I firstly mark the center of it, and then I place the ends to the center to mark the quarters. Now pin the elastic to the seam allowance and match up the markings. The quarter markings of the elastic will match up with the side seams and the front and back marking. The ends of the elastic will meet at one of the side seam, and the ends will lay just next to each other. I used to pin the quarters, and then I will pin another pin right in between. The elastic is obviously shorter than your seam, which is normal. And here is a little close-up view of how the ends will lay right next to each other at one of the sides. Now I'm gonna sew the elastic to the seam allowance with a little zigzag stitch. I'm starting at the ends so I can secure those in one step. Stretch the elastic to the size of your seam allowance, and I like to pull not only in the front but also at the back of my fabric to make sure that the sewing machine can stitch smoothly. Now this is the final waist seam, and now you have to let your skirt hang out because it's a half circle skirt and it will stretch in the bias grain more than in the cross or length grain. For that reason, after 1 to 2 days you will see that the hem is really uneven like this, and now we have to straighten it. I've put my dress to my dress form, but you can wear it and ask someone to help you. First I'm going to figure out the shortest point of the skirt and measure the distance from that point to the floor. Remember that number and measure all the way around from the floor to the hem and mark the point at the hem. Make sure to measure at the same angle all the time. And now what I do is basically to cut from marking to straighten the hem. And this is the final hem. Now I'm gonna hem the skirt. You can basically do that as you want, but I have a favorite method and this is how it works. First I sew with a little seam allowance of 1/2 centimeter and a regular straight stitch all the way around the raw edge, like this. And now I'm gonna fold the hem inwards right at my first seam and stitch as I go. This way you don't need any pins, and I will fold it inwards right at the seam and stitch with a little distance to the edge. This is what it will look like now. And now you can trim off the excess seam allowance. And now I basically repeat this step one more time. Fold the hem inwards right at the seam and stitch close to the edge as you go. This is the final hem from the in, and from the outside it will most likely be a bit wavy now, so give it a good press with steam. Now we're gonna hem the short and midi sleeve length. For the long sleeve, go to the next chapter, and what I do here is basically the same thing as I did for the skirt. First I run a basting stitch along the edge with a seam allowance of 1/2 centimeter and a regular straight stitch, like this. And now I'm going to fold the hem inwards right at the seam, 1/2 centimeter, and stitch close to the edge as I go. Then you can trim off the excess seam allowances. It will look something like this. And now I'm going to repeat the step and fold the hem inwards one more time right at the seam and stitch close to the edge as I go. If you're sewing the long sleeve version first, finish the raw edge at your sleeve hem. I'm using my overlocker, but you can also use a big zigzag stitch as always. This is what it will look like. And now I'm going to fold the hem inwards 2 centimeters and pin it in place. Now I'm gonna hem with a regular straight stitch and a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters. It's important to leave a little gap of like 1 centimeter at one of those two seams. Here you can see the little gap that I left at one of the seams, and now you will need 2 pieces of elastic. You can find the length in the written instructions under materials, or you can just wrap elastic around your wrist and cut it to size, and then pull it through the gap into the hem using a safety pin. Then you will overlap those ends by 1 centimeter and pin them in place. And the last step is to sew those ends together with a little zigzag stitch, and if you want you can now close the gap. That was the tutorial. I hope you liked it and that it was helpful for you. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave a comment, and if you're sharing your make on social media, use the hashtag sewing machine at Bernd so others and me can find it.